This time, we have some kind of good news about Republicans standing up a little bit against the ongoing massive shutdown of this country. In particular, there was a hearing in the United States Senate in which Senator Rand Paul, a doctor himself, and someone who tested positive for the coronavirus and quarantined for 2 weeks, back in session. The Senate is back in session, but you had Dr. Fauci being questioned by the Senate. Fauci, is at home because he's quarantining with coronavirus or having been around someone who had the virus. I want to start. I sent Matt, the extremely wonderful producer, 2 clips, and they're both just essentially portions of what Dr. Fauci had to answer to in the United States Senate as Senator Rand Paul asked him questions about his entire handling of the coronavirus. So we'll start, please, Matt, with the very first clip.
The silver lining to so many infections in the meat processing industry is that a large portion of these workers now have immunity. Those workers should be reassured that they likely won't get it again instead of being alarmed by media reports that there is no evidence of immunity. You've stated publicly that you'd bet it all that survivors of coronavirus have some form of immunity. Can you help set the record straight that the scientific record, as it is being accumulated, is supportive that infection with coronavirus likely leads to some form of immunity? Dr. Fauci.
Yep. Thank you for the question, Senator Paul. Yes, you're correct that I have said that given what we know about the recovery from viruses such as coronaviruses in general, or even any infectious disease with very few exceptions, that when you have antibody present, it very likely indicates a degree of protection. I think it's in the semantics of how this is expressed. When you say, has it been formally proven by long-term natural history studies, which is the only way that you can prove, one, is it protective, which I said and would repeat, is likely that it is, but also, what is the degree or titer of antibody that gives you that critical level of protection, and what is the durability? As I've often said, and again repeat, you can make a reasonable assumption that it would be protective, but natural history studies over a period of months to years will then tell you definitively if that's the case.
And I think that's important because in all likelihood is a good way of putting it. The vast majority of these people will have immunity. Instead of saying there is no evidence, the WHO kind of fed into this by saying no evidence of immunity. And in reality, there's every evidence stacking up. And in fact, a lot of the different studies have shown that it is very unlikely that you get it again in the short term.
The reason I wanted to play that, we're going to hit on this point first in this first 5, which will be longer than 5, I'm going to tell you right now. But what we have watched in this country, and what I really want to talk about a lot today, is how the media and the left are complicit in dragging out the shutdown of this country in response to coronavirus, putting out warning signals of all kinds, making people nervous, starting from a bizarre and irrational presumption that somehow somebody like Dr. Fauci can keep us all safe if we just do everything he says. And this was a great opportunity for Rand Paul, who has credibility as a doctor, asking Fauci, why can't you just say in plain, straight out, say it in English, that if you've had the virus, you have immunity? Not asking him to guarantee 100% of the time that every single person who has ever had contact with the virus has immunity the rest of their lives. Not asking for that kind of absurdity or just, absoluteness. But Dr. Fauci regularly parses his words, minces his words, nitpicks his words, so that maybe, so he's protected from someone claiming, hey, I thought you told me I'd be safe. But the fact is, Dr. Fauci's words make Americans nervous. He won't come out and say flat out facts because he doesn't want to do it. And this is what Rand Paul wanted. And embellish some of what Rand Paul actually and was not in the segment you just played. Rand Paul actually ran through with Fauci. We already know in experiments with rhesus monkeys infected with COVID-19, they can't be reinfected. So we have that research. We already know studies show plasma from recovered COVID-19 patients neutralizes the virus in lab experiments. Huge proof that there is immunity developed by having had the virus. The entire premise of convalescent plasma treatment, using plasma from people who have recovered, giving it to others, is mentioned by several on the panel as a potential treatment currently in trials is that recovered patients develop immunity capable of killing the virus, and recovering patients across the board are showing significant antibody response. So you had Rand Paul trying to get Fauci to say, can you just acknowledge? In plain English, contrary to the media that is forever and a day trying to stir up doubts and fears and keep the American people rooted in fears about walking out of their house in the morning, come on, says Rand Paul, Dr. Fauci, can you please at least step up and do that? And Fauci kind of mealy-mouthed his way through and finally got around to saying, well, yeah, man, kind of like that's kind of true. And what is really happening, you have all sorts of false premises out there to start with. One being this idea, as I said at the outset, somehow that if you just listen to Fauci and do everything he says, that somehow we'll all be safe and no one will ever get coronavirus again, and no one will ever be infected, and no one will ever have a problem, and it's become an absurdity. We have planted fear in the hearts and minds of Americans, and in my view, Fauci likes that. It helps him. It helps him keep control of the situation, helps him keep control of the people if the people are afraid. And actually, so Rand Paul went on to say, he pointed out the media has been planting seeds of doubt in the minds of the American people about whether, even if you've had the virus, are you really protected? He's saying this is hurting the meat packers who are through this, sending them back to work, and you're making them afraid they're going to get it again. Why don't you stand up and speak truth? So, and actually, the other thing he pointed out, which is really good, Rand Paul pointed out, was that in other viruses like SARS and MERS, coronaviruses with similar clinical presentations actually, when you're recovered, confers immunity for 2 to 3 years. So that was a great piece. Another piece that Rand Paul went after in this questioning of Fauci in the Senate, I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago, talked about the idea of why in the world, Dr. Fauci, are we talking about kids not going back to school in the fall? What are you talking about? And so I want to ask Matt the Wonderful to play the next clip. It's really Rand Paul wrapping up and not actually asking a question, but making these points that just never get made in the media. So Matt the Wonderful, if we have that next clip.
With regard to going back to school, one thing that was left out of that discussion is mortality. I mean, shouldn't we at least be discussing what the mortality of children is? This is for Dr. Fauci as well. You know, the mortality between 0 and 18 in the New York data approaches 0. It's not going to be absolutely 0, but it almost approaches 0. Between 18 and 45, the mortality in New York was 10 out of 100,000. So really, we do need to be thinking about that. We need to observe with an open mind what went on in Sweden, where the kids kept going to school. The mortality per capita in Sweden is actually less than France, less than Italy, less than Spain, less than Belgium, less than the Netherlands, about the same as Switzerland. But basically, I don't think there's anybody arguing that what happened in Sweden is an unacceptable result. I think people are intrigued by it, and we should be. I don't think any of us are certain when we do all these modelings. There have been more people wrong with modeling than right. We're opening up a lot of economies around the U.S., and I hope that people who are predicting doom and gloom and saying, oh, we can't do this, there's going to be a surge, will admit that they were wrong if there isn't a surge, because I think that's what's going to happen. In rural states, we never really reached any sort of pandemic levels in Kentucky and other states. We have less deaths in Kentucky than we have in an average flu season. It's not to say this isn't deadly, but really outside of New England, we've had a relatively benign course for this virus nationwide. And I think the one-size-fits-all that we're going to have a national strategy and nobody's going to go to school is kind of ridiculous. We really ought to be doing it school district by school district, and the power needs to be dispersed because people make wrong predictions. And really the history of this, when we look back, will be of wrong prediction after wrong prediction after wrong prediction, starting with Ferguson in England. So I think we ought to have a little bit of humility in our belief that we know what's best for the economy. And as much as I respect you, Dr. Fauci, I don't think you're the end all. I don't think you're the one person that gets to make a decision. We can listen to your advice, but there are people on the other side saying there's not going to be a surge and that we can safely open the economy, and the facts will bear this out. But if we keep keep kids out of school for another year, what's going to happen is the poor and underprivileged kids who don't have a parent that's able to teach them at home are not going to learn for a full year. And I think we ought to look at the Swedish model, and we ought to look at letting our kids get back to school. I think it's a huge mistake if we don't open the schools in the fall.
Thank God for Senator Rand Paul. This is a guy finally saying what experts around the country have been saying, expert microbiologists, expert immunologists, pointing out from the start, why is everyone bowing at the knees of Dr. Fauci? Why is everyone basing every decision in this country, all over the country, on one man? And I'm going to wrap up the first 5 by saying, I hope that what we saw out of Rand Paul is there's more of that coming from more Republican voices. It needs to come from the White House. It needs to come from the White House saying, he's one guy, Fauci's one guy, he's not the only one. He's not the be-all and end-all. He's not the one expert in the planet, and that other very respected doctors in this country should have their voices heard too. Policies need to stop being driven by one guy's extremely wrong analysis from the start. And I will close this first 5 by saying there was one quote that Rand Paul had, which you heard a portion of it. He said, the history of this, when we look back, will be a wrong prediction after wrong prediction after wrong prediction. Exactly right. We need to reopen America and stop listening to Dr. Fauci as the one and only person who makes policy in this country related to coronavirus. And that, my friends, is today's First 5.